Anyway, I'm delighted to welcome, I mentioned at the top of the hour, top of the show, a scoop in The Spectator Australia, you can read it, by David Adler, who is the president of the Australian Jewish Association. Now, David Adler has been on Outsiders many times before and was largely responsible for, with this program and with various senators, having aid to the Palestinian Authority reduced. Your taxes, your money that was going in the pay-to-slay, allegedly, in the pay-to-slay program. Julie Bishop removed $10 million of those dollars. David Adler has now come up with this piece of advice. This is a QC's advice. You can read about it, as I said, in The Spectator Australia. This QC, David Adler, specifically asked the QC to look at whether the Palestinian Authority meets the definition of a terrorist organisation under Australian law. Here's the advice, and you can read it yourself. I'll quote it, but basically the QC's opinion is that it seems inevitable that under Australian law, the Palestinian Authority is a terrorist organisation. To talk us through his scoop, I'm delighted to welcome back to Outsiders, David Adler.
Thank you, Rowan, and it's a pleasure to be here with the Outsiders Dream Team.
It's great to see you. We'll also mention a little bit later the appalling events in San Diego. But before we get to that, talk us through this advice, how you came to do it, and what the ramifications are, particularly for the Labor Party.
Well, this is very significant because we've thought for some time that the Palestinian Authority is a terrorist organisation.
Why?
If you, for example, take a weapon and murder an innocent person, then you're guilty of a serious crime, obviously. If you hire a hitman to do it for you, you are also guilty of a serious crime, similar magnitude. And the latter is what the Palestinian Authority does. And there is overwhelming evidence that it's called the Pay for Slay program.
Talk us through that.
Well, I've got some illustrations which hopefully we can bring up. So that your viewers are in no doubt as to what's going on. Firstly, there is a pay scale that has been published. It's been produced by an organisation called the Palestinian Media Watch, and it shows the amount of money that a terrorist will get if they attack or kill Jews in Israel. The bigger the crime, the bigger the sentence, the more the money. No hiding it. It's out there for everyone to see. The second thing that they do, which is outrageous in our view, is that they glorify the terrorists. Immediately after a terrorist attack, they might be handing out sweets, lollies, cakes on the street, but they also produce posters which indicate that these people are role models. We have one on the screen at the moment, a recent example, and I've chosen this recent example because this particular event, you can see the date on it, March of this year. It occurred only a day or two after the Christchurch massacre. And can you imagine if the terrorist that killed the Muslims in the mosques was glorified the next day, had a mosque named after him, had a street named after him, had a square named after him, and the authorities financially rewarded him or his family? I mean, it would be obscene beyond
Well, I remember the Australian girl, Malky Roth, who's the daughter of Arnold Roth, the woman who arranged for this young Australian girl and her friends in a pizza parlour to be murdered and blown to pieces. She's glorified throughout the Palestinian community as a great hero. Carry on. And
their leaders make it quite clear that the payments to the terrorists are not just part of their budget, but is their highest priority. And I've brought a short clip from the president of the Palestinian Authority that was broadcast repeatedly on the official PATV. And maybe if it's possible to bring that up.
بأن رواتب شهدائنا وأسرانا وجرحانا خط أحمر يحاولون بكل الوسائل ويضغطون بكل الوسائل ولا زالوا يضغطون إنه هذا لا يجوز أن تدفعوه. إلى يومنا هذا الأمر بالنسبة لنا أمر مقدس. الشهداء وعائلاتهم مقدسون، الجرحى الأسرى كلهم يجب أن ندفع لهم، لو بقي عنا قرش واحد هو لهم وليس للأحياء.
So, David, tell us exactly what was going on there. Tell us what he was saying.
Well, what he was saying is that out of the funds that they have available, and remember, these people receive the highest per capita foreign aid on the planet.
Right.
And they have for years.
From us as well.
Us as well. We
Yep,
still
from
give
other people.
$43 million to something in the budget called Palestinian territories. Now, we're about to throw a spanner into that particular process. But he's indicating that if he had no money left other than a little, he would use it to pay the terrorists.
OK, so how does
it's sacred. He said the money
That's
to
right.
the martyrs and their
Is
families
sacred.
are sacred.
So
now, how do they justify it? Because how do they explain it? How do they get away with giving this money, and the longer the jail term you've got, the more you get each month? Explain what is their justification, or how do they explain it to the West so it's palatable to us?
Well, they don't believe that Israel is legitimate. They refer to Israel as the Zionist occupation, and they refer to the people who are fighting against Israel as the resistance.
OK,
So
but we could, there's a long...
Yeah.
We could go into that. I want to get to this advice from the QC.
Well, if I can focus on that, we have a couple of lawyers on our committee, and together with them I sat down and we had a look at the Australian Criminal Code, which contains the definitions of terrorist organisation.
Yep.
Division 102 is where those definitions exist. And we have in our law, in addition to undertaking terrorism, terms like fostering terrorism and advocating. And so we referred this in a brief to arguably Australia's leading legal mind on the subject, former Director of Public Prosecutions of Victoria, who's dealt with such cases, Jeremy Rapke QC, and asked his advice. And he confirmed our impression in quite strong and direct language that the Palestinian Authority meets the criteria as a terrorist organisation under Australian law.
OK, so if that's the case, and he's right, what does this mean for Labor's policy of recognising Palestine? Penny Wong came out and others at the Labor conference, they said they would recognise Palestine. Does this put, if Labor do win the election, in a position of going against Australian criminal law?
Absolutely. This has huge implications for Australian foreign policy, for the way our foreign aid to the Middle East is administered, and to the Labor policy, which was adopted in December last year to unilaterally recognise the state of Palestine, because the consequence of the PA being a terrorist organisation is that all those things become illegal. It is illegal to provide support, whether it's financial or diplomatic. It is illegal to fund. It is even illegal to be associated with a terrorist organisation under Australian law. So that's the
Well, extraordinary. You can read it in The Spectator Australia. You can read David Adler's article on this. Just briefly before we go, horrific events in San Diego. David, talk to us your thoughts this morning.
Another shooting in a synagogue. I know earlier in the program you were talking about the terrorism in the churches in Sri Lanka. We have another synagogue in America near San Diego where a 19-year-old gunman walked in and started shooting people. There is a bit of additional information I can drop out in Outsiders that's not in the news. There is an Australian connection. The rabbi at the Chabad where the shooting occurred near San Diego, his brother-in-law is a prominent Sydney rabbi of Chabad in Bondi. Wow. So we actually have a direct family connection with what happened in San Diego.
And it's very lucky that there wasn't more bloodshed in this particular shooting, because there was, I think, a off-duty ICE agent close by who took some action, and it could have been considerably worse than it already is.
I just wanted to also just bring up the New York Times cartoon that we talked about earlier today. I don't know if you saw that, but, I mean, just your thoughts very briefly on these sorts of anti-Semitic tropes which keep coming up in the mainstream media.
Look, we have seen in the last couple of years an incredible rise in overt anti-Semitism. We've seen in this political campaign in Australia swastikas put on Julian Leese's posters. Josh Frydenberg's in Melbourne. We've had Bondi Beach twice in the last 3 months. As you say, the cartoons. Something is happening. There's a trend of the veil that has hidden anti-Semitism is being removed, and it's becoming more and more of a very disturbing trend.
Well, David Adler, you can read in the Spectator of Australia, you can read David Adler's scoop on the fact that the advice is here, QC's advice, that the Palestinian Authority is, it seems, inevitably a terrorist organisation under Australian law. David Adler, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. Great to have you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks.